Thanksgiving, an American holiday that commemorates the arrival of some of the very first pilgrims to the land of America. Our feasts celebrate the relationship between the native peoples who welcomed these pilgrims and helped them survive some of the first winters.
Decolonize! 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 Tell them the real story about how Columbus came to rape and pillage and kill the natives! Tell them the real story!
Actually, you're both wrong. The real story of Thanksgiving is the triumph of capitalism over collectivism. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Teaching Liberty. My name is Stephanie Edmonds, and in this video, I'm going to tell you the real story of Thanksgiving. The beginning of the story, for the most part, is accurate. In 1620, a group of English Puritans left Great Britain and sailed across the Atlantic on the Mayflower and arrived in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Thanks to the writings of William Bradford, the man who was elected governor of the colony, we have decent insight into the perspective of these colonists. Not only would they be religiously devout, but the community would be founded on social altruism, the type described in Plato's Republic where all would work and live in common. However, due to several months of delays trying to leave England, the Pilgrims arrived in the New World as winter was fast approaching, and they arrived much further north than their intended destination along the Hudson River, where they had secured a patent from the Virginia Company. And so after a long and hard journey across the Atlantic, with their supplies dwindling and the cold of winter setting in, the Pilgrims decided the best course of action was to look around the Cape Cod area for a place to settle. They explored the Cape for about a month, and in December they arrived in what is known as Plymouth and began to build their settlement. So this picture we have of natives standing at the shores to welcome pilgrims is much more mythology than truth. Nonetheless, the Pilgrims found plenty of evidence of the native populations. Native Americans typically migrated with the seasons, and since it was winter, they receded more inland and would return in the summer months. It is also believed that a plague swept this region, likely from other European explorers and colonists, thinning out the native populations and perhaps also the cause of the mysterious disappearance of other colonies that had attempted to settle in this area. So while there were native people in the area, it was relatively sparsely populated at this time, which was probably to the benefit of these pilgrims, since the previous Europeans who they had interacted with did not leave on the best of terms. And these pilgrims were well aware of that. They had heard the stories, but they were desperate. So against their better judgment, they stole a store of maize that they had come across, along with some other items. As the Pilgrims worked through the heart of the winter to build structures and survive, they were haunted by the thought that any moment, natives would attack them. But the natives didn't attack, and the Pilgrims made it through the winter. The winter season finally gave way to warmer weather. That March, the Pilgrims would have their first direct interaction with the natives. Here is Governor William Bradford's first-hand account, and I'm just going to slightly change some of the language so it's easier for modern audiences to understand. It should also be understood that the theys in this are the Pilgrims. About the 16th of March, a certain Indian came boldly amongst them and spoke to them in broken English, which they could understand but marveled at it. At length they understood by discourse with him that he was not of these parts, but belonged to the eastern parts, where some English ships came to fish, with whom he was acquainted and could name some of them by their names, amongst whom he had gotten his language. At length they understood by discourse with him that he was not of these parts, but belonged to the eastern parts, where some English ships came to fish, with whom he was acquainted, and could name some of them by their names, amongst whom he had gotten his language. He became profitable to them in acquainting them with many things concerning the state of the country in the eastern part where he lived, which was afterwards profitable unto them, and also of the people to hear of their names, number, and strength, of their situation and distance from this place, and of whose chief amongst them. His name was Samoset, and he told them also of another Indian whose name was Squanto, a native in this place, who had been in England and could speak better English than himself. being after some time of entertainment and gifts dismissed, a while after he came again, and 5 more with him. They brought again all the tools that were stolen away before, and made way for the coming of their great sachem called Massasoit, who about 4 or 5 days after came with the chief of his friends and other attendees with the aforesaid Squanto, with whom after friendly entertainment and some gifts given him, they made a peace with him. So they meet the natives, and a couple of them actually speak English. And if you've ever seen Pocahontas and John Smith, you're probably familiar with Squanto. He was a real person who really got abducted, brought back to England, learned English, was brought back to the native lands, escaped to freedom, and acted as a go-between for the natives and the Pilgrims. To the relief of the Pilgrims, this interaction ended with a peace treaty between them and the native population. And in fact, Squanto continued on with the Pilgrims. Here's Governor William Bradford's account. Squanto continued with them and was their interpreter and was a special instrument sent of God for their good beyond their expectation. He directed them how to set their corn, where to take fish, and to procure other commodities, and was also their pilot to bring them to unknown places for their profit, and never left them till he died. So with the help of Squanto, in 1622 the Pilgrims farmed the land, fished, and engaged in trade. And by the following fall's harvest, their situation had appeared to improved, and they felt much more prepared for the winter. The Pilgrims had a good quantity of beaver, and they began now to gather the small harvest they had, and to fit up their houses and dwellings against winter, being all well recovered in health and strength, and had all things in good plenty. And for that they found the Lord to be with them in all their ways, and to bless their outgoings and incomings, for which they let his holy name have the praise forever, to all prosperity. He went on to write, and besides waterfowl there was great store of wild turkeys, of which they took many. Besides venison, besides that they had about a peck a meal a week to a person, or now since harvest, Indian corn, in the same proportion. At this point, you may be urged to point to this as the cause for our Thanksgiving celebration. However, the seeming abundance quickly faded as the harsh realities of winter set in. In the midst of another treacherous winter season, the Pilgrims gathered and decided something had to change. And this is the real story of Thanksgiving, the triumph of capitalism over collectivism. Let's hear it in Governor William Bradford's own words. The Pilgrims began to think how they might raise as much corn as they could, and obtain a better crop than they had done, that they might not still thus languish in misery. At length, after much debate of things, the governor gave way that they should set corn, every man for his own particular, and in that regard trust to themselves. In all other things to go on the general way as before. And so assign to every family a parcel of land according to the proportion of their number for that end, and only for present use, but made no division for inheritance, and ranged all boys and youth under some family. Because remember, so many people had died that some kids were actually the only surviving members of their family. And guess what? It worked. This had very good success, for it made all hands very industrious, so as much more corn was planted than otherwise would have been by any means the governor or any other could use, and saved him a great deal of trouble, and gave far better content. The women now willingly went into the field, and took their little ones with them to set corn, which before would allege weakness and inability, whom to have been compelled would have been thought great tyranny and oppression. It's almost as if these Pilgrims who didn't want to work were reading from the woke handbook. They found work oppressive, tyrannical. They were trying to decolonize before the colony had even been started. And that's because as much as things change, they stay the same. Human nature is human nature. A community of perfect equality where altruism is the highest of values. I mean, what could be better than that? It's paradise, but it doesn't work. And Governor Bradford explains exactly why. The experience that was had in this common course and condition through these years, and that amongst godly and sober men, may well be evidence of the vanity and conceit of Plato's and other ancients, applauded by some of later times, that the taking away of property and bringing in community into a commonwealth would make them happy and flourishing, as if they were wiser than God. For this community, so far as it was found to breed much confusion and discontent and retard the employment that would have been to their benefit and comfort. For the young men that were most able and fit for labor and service did repine that they should spend their time and strength to work for other men's wives and children without any recompense. The strong, or man of parts, had no more in division of victuals and clothes than he that was weak and not able to do a quarter that the other could. This was thought an injustice. The aged and graver men to be ranked and equalized in labors, and victuals, clothes, etc., with the meaner and younger sort, thought it some indignant and disrespect unto them. And for men's wives to be commanded to do service for other men, as dressing their meat, washing their clothes, and deemed it a kind of slavery, neither could many husbands take it. Upon the point all being alike, and all to do alike, they thought themselves in the like condition, and one as good as another. And so, if it did not cut those relations that God hath set amongst men, yet it did at least diminish and take of the mutual respects that should be preserved amongst them, and would have been worse if they had been men in another condition. Let none object to this men's corruption. Let none object to this men's corruption, and nothing to the course itself. I answer, seeing all men have this corruption in them, God in his wisdom saw another course fitter for them. So some of the language is a little bit foreign or hard to understand for modern audiences, but the core is there. Collectivism depletes the individual's desire and motivation to do better. It doesn't help improve the community for everyone because we're just going to have to split it up. Who cares? We'll all do work together. It all come together. When in fact, the strength of the community comes from the individuals who make it up. And each of those individuals must act in their full strength and full capacity in order for that community to succeed. As Bradford explains, the abundance of a community is created when each individual takes responsibility for him and herself and their family. In contrast, when men attempt to devise an ideal order, it breeds chaos, corruption, and jealousies. Because as Bradford puts it, to attempt to impose such an order is to believe oneself wiser than God. And if you don't believe in God, that's okay. You can see it more as a symbol or a metaphor for the order of nature. The patterns of the world work in a certain way, and when you attempt to defy those patterns, you diminish your potential for prosperity. And certainly, as we celebrate Thanksgiving and we tell this story, there's room in the conversation to discuss the relations between the pilgrims and native peoples who already inhabited this land. We must discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly. So celebrate this Thanksgiving by debunking the mythology, as well as the modern grievance politics, and tell the true story, the triumph of capitalism over collectivism. Happy Thanksgiving, and I'd be extremely grateful if you hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you're new here, and leave me a comment down below to let me know what you think of this video. And listen, a nation that's disconnected from its identity can only survive but for so long. So it depends on you to send this video to your friends and family and let them know the real story of Thanksgiving is the story of the United States of America. It is the triumph of capitalism over collectivism. Until next time, think free, live free, and give all the glory to God.
Come on.